Welcome back to my kitchen. This week we are doing the much awaited third episode of ingredient prep. And if you're not sure what ingredient prep is, instead of prepping a few different meals, you prep one main ingredient and serve it a few different ways throughout the week. So this is a good option for someone who wants more variety in their diet, or you just want to have something in the fridge that you can throw together as you go. So far, I've only been doing proteins. You can do it with more than proteins, but the first episode was black beans and the second was tofu. So this one is chickpeas, my third favorite protein. And we are marinating the chickpeas. Chickpeas marinate super well, just an easy way to add flavor to an otherwise pretty blank slate. And instead of sharing just one main recipe, I'm going to share three because there's a lot of different ways to marinate chickpeas. And honestly, they're all pretty quick to throw together, so you might as well just have three to choose from. So for these recipes, I'm using 1 can of chickpeas per recipe. That's about 1.5 cups of cooked chickpeas. So I have this giant container of chickpeas, and it's just chickpeas that I cooked in the Instant Pot. That's my preferred way to do it. It's an easy way to save on money, and the chickpeas just end up nice and firm, not too soft. You can really control their entire texture and flavor this way. For this first recipe, we are using 1/4 cup of olive oil. Add that directly on the chickpeas. I'll use an equal amount of balsamic vinegar. Here we go. Next up, we'll be adding some chopped parsley. So I do recommend chopping the parsley quite finely. It'll just make it so that it infuses into the dish instead of you taking a bite and just eating a giant piece of parsley. So let's add those to the chickpeas. I'd say this is about 1/2 cup. If you're not a huge fan of parsley, I would decrease it to 1/4 cup. And then I will add a pinch of salt. This is not a pinch of salt. A pinch of salt, let's say about 1/4 teaspoon of this Diamond Kosher salt. Add some black pepper. And we'll finish it off with a little bit of lemon zest. I'd say about like 1/2 teaspoon. About a tablespoon. I'll just use my hands to catch the seeds. For this next marinated chickpea recipe, we'll be doing something that's kind of like a cross between romesco sauce with a pesto method. You'll probably understand what I'm saying as we go along. To keep things easier for this recipe, I'm using julienne tomatoes, so they've already been sliced and packaged. You can buy sun-dried tomatoes either dried, so they're in a bag, or packed in oil. The reason that I'm using dried and not oil-packed sun-dried tomatoes is because it just allows a lot more control over the recipe. To start things off, we do want to really break down these almonds and sun-dried tomatoes. I like to choose slivered almonds. That's because they're already sliced, which makes breaking them super easy. The nice thing about this recipe is you don't have to chop anything by hand, but if you don't have a blender or a food processor, then you can chop the almonds and the sun-dried tomatoes by hand. It'll just take a little more effort. All right, so we're going to add 1/2 cup of these almonds and 1/2 cup of the sliced sun-dried tomatoes. And just an aside, if you do have oil-packed sun-dried tomatoes, it's going to be a lot harder to break this down because the oil is going to get everything sticky. So I just recommend not using oil-packed unless you want to chop things by hand, or just you'll find that things are a little more difficult. Now to blend everything together, we will add in some olive oil. I'm doing 1/4 cup of olive oil, along with 2 tablespoons of lemon juice or so. And then seasonings. So for these seasonings, we are doing 1/2 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. I use Diamond crystal salt, so it's a little less dense than traditional salt. So I'd recommend doing 1/4 teaspoon if you're doing like a table salt, or just adjust to taste. And 1 teaspoon of dried basil. This recipe would be absolutely delicious with fresh basil, but I don't have any fresh basil in my garden right now, and dried basil is quite pungent and sweet, so I like using it. But if it's summer, I totally recommend using fresh basil. So this is how you can see it's kind of pesto-like, in that it's like a thick pesto-like sauce. What I like to do to thin it out a bit is just add some water. And now we can add the chickpeas back in, so about 1.5 cups. I mean, I guess you could just call this sun-dried tomato pesto now that I think about it, because it's just like pesto ingredients with sun-dried tomatoes. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's so freaking good. It's like, has that really umami, acidic, tanginess from the sun-dried tomatoes, and then you have the nuttiness from the almonds. So this is quite a rich dish. So I saved my favorite for last. This is a falafel-inspired marinated chickpea dish. As you might guess, we're using ingredients that you use to make falafel, but instead of actually making falafel, we're just going to marinate the chickpeas. First up, let's do this red onion. We just need 1/2 of finely chopped red onion. So I have already gone ahead and rinsed the dill and parsley. We're aiming for about 1/4 cup each. So once again, just chop it nice and fine. Unlike the basil in the last recipe that you can use dry, I recommend using fresh for this just because it does carry so much of the flavor. It's one of the most important ingredients here. I like to grate garlic because it creates a larger surface area, which means it will coat more of the marinade. I use a microplane. It's really the same process as zesting a lemon. Now we just add everything else in. So we got our chickpeas. We'll add in the fresh herbs. I'll add the zest of 1 lemon. Unlike that last recipe that just used a little bit of a zest, we want the whole thing here. 1 small lemon gets about 1 teaspoon of zest, depending on how finely you're grating it, but don't worry too much about measurements here. Now we'll add in that red onion, nice and finely diced, and the lemon juice. Lemon juice. For seasonings, we'll do some ground cumin and salt. Then let's give that all a stir so that the cumin, etc., doesn't clump up when we add the olive oil. The olive oil. 1/4 cup of olive oil. Okay, so this might seem quite simple, but when I tell you, it's so good. Our third and final one, my favorite one, your favorite one, maybe, you'll have to let me know down below. So before we get into how to serve these, I will say these keep for 3 to 4 to 5 days in the fridge. They will get more flavorful every day they are in the fridge. So if you want to make these for ingredient prep, I recommend just choosing one of these, maybe doubling the recipe and then serving them a few different ways instead of making all 3 of these, unless you have a big family or you just really love chickpeas, because you will be swimming in chickpeas. But I do want to say that all of these recipes can be served each way I'm showing you. I'm just using the recipe that I think goes best. The first recipe is like a salad or bowl. It uses the falafel chickpeas with arugula, hummus, feta, and pita chips. You could also add a green like quinoa or farro, but it's a variation of this recipe that I pulled from the blog. This one uses the marinated balsamic chickpeas, and it's what inspired this entire series. Another good option is to make pita sandwiches using similar ingredients. And then the sun-dried tomato chickpeas are really good tossed with pasta, and you can add in some sauteed spinach and onion and maybe a few dollops of goat or feta cheese. The last one is a bonus because it's more of an appetizer or a snack than meal, but it's so good. Just spread goat cheese on a plate and top with the sun-dried tomato chickpeas and serve with herby crackers. Okay, so let me know down below which one of these you want to try first. And of course, if you do try them, I love hearing from you. And if you have any requests for ingredient prep videos or any recipe requests in general, definitely leave me a comment or shoot me an email. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another new video.